Hello and welcome to the Approach Angle Podcast, a pitcher list podcast dedicated to teaching you all things baseball analytics. I'm your host, Nate Schwartz, joined as always by Director of Analytics, Kyle Bland. Kyle, how's it going?
Hey there, Nate. Exciting times. We got new baseball stats. We're gonna crack into them. I know that's all I've been thinking about for the past. I think they've been out. This is the third day they're out. Feels like forever, and feels like just yesterday.
Exactly. Yeah, I was, it's going to be a little bit of a pivot this week. I was fully ready to keep kind of our hard pitching train going. And then our wonderful friends over at MLB, kind of teased that something big was coming. And before you know it, there was, a new thing that we have kind of dropped everything we're doing on the baseball side, like new stat, new shiny number. So there's some new StatCast metrics out. They're around miss distance, relevant to bat tracking. So how much is a bat, missing a specific pitch kind of in space. And on first look, it is just really, really exciting. I think it'll have an effect on how we view both hitters and pitchers in that relationship. And opens up just a lot of really interesting questions that I know we will kind of dive into kind of on the philosophical level here in the next 45 minutes to an hour. But I also, really want to say that it has been out 3 days, as Kyle mentioned. So Kyle hasn't had enough time to put all of his, super incredible research skills to the test on this. And there isn't a lot of public facing research out there on this, so we're going to talk about it, what we know, kind of get into how we evaluate a new stat, what this means, and where do we think it's going to go in the coming weeks, months, years, now that this data is out there. But Kyle, when you first saw this drop, what was your gut reaction? Was this something that you were immediately excited by, or did you feel like it was going to take a little bit to figure out what to do with this?
So I'm a little spoiled, and this isn't insider baseball info, but the Statcast crew, the Savant crew, every year show up at the Saber Analytics Conference in Phoenix, and I've been going the last 2 years. They had me on to present our process stats, which was really cool 2 years ago, and then I came this last year. It's a great conference if you can come out to it. There are tons of analytics staffers from teams there. There's students. There's a whole student competition, which is crazy to see these like high schoolers doing cutting edge baseball research. It's wild. But part of it is the Savant crew does a presentation on things basically they're looking at and working on. And so they give a taste test of here's things that they think will kind of are likely to be out this year. Here's things they're working on. So they don't commit to hard dates or this is definitely going to be out in 2026, but they had a decently advanced look at some of these swing miss and swing timing metrics. So I did have at least a little bit of a head start on thinking about them. It's super exciting to see them, and obviously the the Savant crew has done a tremendous job with adding them to the site and making them interactive. The visuals are great. The explainers have been super helpful. So I think it's been a tremendous rollout from them. And I was excited to see it, and I knew kind of once it happened, like, all right, time to get cracking on this because there's so much cool info that we can glean from it.
Yeah, it's really exciting because once we got into the backtracking stuff, that felt like a whole nother world. And to see it actually, take that one step further as, it's not just the bat moving on a plane at a certain swing speed or tilt kind of, metrics we've talked about earlier this season. It's really into how is the bat moving along with the ball in relation to pitch movement and stuff like that. So miss distance is kind of the big one that they debuted, kind of per Statcast's actual definition. Miss distance expresses the distance at the closest moment of approach between the top half of the bat and the ball in inches. So really, just really quantifying, what point on a whiff is the bat, closest or furthest away from the ball. So really, kind of quantifying that distance. You see it all the time. We all laugh, and I know in some of the articles about this when it released, about the worst swings and misses, where a guy's 40 to 50 inches away on making contact, and it just looks so goofy. But when you see this, is it open your eyes into like contact point and getting more into things like intercept point that we talked about, or is it more on your side? Do you see this as more of a this goes into like a decision making process?
Yeah, this to me helps give kind of context for whiffs. Like obviously, like, oh, whiffs are good for the pitcher, bad for the batter. it gives you kind of like the magnitude of it. And I think, yeah, you're right that this kind of provides a lot more context for how much like I was fooled by, because generally major league hitters, if they swing where they expect the ball to go, and they can generally make contact if the ball ends up there. And so I think this is both, oh, I thought the ball was going to be here and it wasn't, so I whiffed by a lot. Or there's also probably a subset too of like guys who have some barrel variability. So that's going to be maybe like your slower swing speed guys like Luis Arias, Steven Kwan, that like manipulate the bat kind of during the swing so that they kind of get wood to it wherever the ball ends up. I think there's a little bit of that teased in here a little bit. I think it's super fun, and I think I'm really curious to use it to contextualize kind of how nasty pitches are too. We have other bat tracking info like swing tilt, and we can start to look at, okay, well, if a batter's tilt is here, he usually tilts, at this amount. So you can back your way into like he thought the pitch would end up here, and it ended up here, and he missed by this much, and you can start to see like, okay, this pitch had this missed distance over expected, and whether that's due to nastiness or whether that's due to like sequencing or whatever, like those are, you know, every time we get new stats, it's like the hydra of like one new stat begets like three more new stats every time. And so like this is how I know like my brain works with this kind of stuff.
And we'll get in a little bit later into how our brains, really operate when we see the new data. But the most interesting thing to me in kind of the initial classifications of this stuff is that the bat here, in kind of measurement purposes, isn't actually the full bat. Can you talk to us a little bit, Kyle, why that's the case? Why they only consider the top half of the bat as, the main part of the tracking?
Yeah, so I can't get into like the philosophy of why they picked the dimensions they did, but the definition they're using is the top half of the bat. So the barrel end of the bat. And given that definition, given their words at face value, that means it's about a an area that's about 2.6 inches wide. That's about the limit allowed by Major League Baseball for the barrel. Even the torpedo bats, they can only be that wide. And then about, on average, probably like 17 inches. MLB bats, on average, probably about 34, but they get some wiggle room. You'll get, down to 32 up to 36, but about 17 inches. So that's like the no miss chunk. A little over 2.5 inches by about 17 inches. And that's the point on the bat that they're looking at. And I think part of that is that's where, I mean, obviously good contact, like that's where the sweet spot of the bat is. But even like if you kind of hit it off the end, or you kind of hit it towards the middle of the bat, you can still get hits. You can still get like balls in play that can like find gaps. But I feel like once you get in on that handle portion, that like hand half of the bat, you're not really doing much. Or if anything, that's gonna like shatter, like it's gonna break the bat kind of on contact. And so they're basically looking like how much did you miss the area of the bat that can do damage on contact.
And it makes sense when you think about it, of no one is ever trying to hit the ball with the inner in on the hands, skinny part of the bat. Even the guys like Stephen Kwan or Luis Arias, who have this impeccable bat control, their skill comes from their ability to get the barrel into the right place. It's not like they're trying to get sawed off and fist, a really looping, really poor 50-mile-an-hour pop up into, shallow right field. It's no, they're trying to get the barrel to make good enough contact to dump it into the outfield for a base hit. But it's not, you're not ever trying to do that. So it makes sense to keep that top half of the bat is like, this is what hitters across the board are trying to use to do all of their damage, or not damage, just make contact. That makes sense to measure. But the
And
other
some of it
aspect of
too,
this, oh,
sorry, just before, while we're still on this, like thinking about it, and I know I threw my like offhand like torpedo bat reference, but like what the point of the torpedo bat was kind of shifting where the sweet spot on the bat was, along the plane of the bat, to either get it further away from your hands a little bit. And so like I think that fits their definition too of bats have different lengths, and they have to deal with that. MLB has to deal with that. Statcast has to process that. And now with these kind of variable bat shapes, they also have to be like, well, we can't just say like, oh, the sweet spot is here, because that may be true for a regular bat and that's not true for a torpedo bat, or it might be like shifted by like, some distance. And so rather than try and be like define what bats are used, they just said here it's going to be kind of a big chunk, kind of an open area. you know this encompasses all of the really good contact, and maybe at the edges, at the fringe cases, it's weak contact, but for the most part this will cover everything of interest to us with a little margin for error.
And the other thing that they included in this release on their leaderboards for both hitters and pitchers is kind of there are three additional dimensions to the data. So you're looking at where the bat was when, in relation to the ball. So were they, over or under the ball? Were they early or late on their timing? And then where on the barrel it is hitting? Is it in or out on the bat? They also kind of segment those into two kind of all-encompassing stats. A flawed swing percentage, which means that you were over or under the ball, you were early or late on the ball, and it was hit either in or out on the bat. So none of those turns into a flawed swing. And then perfect contact would be all of the three. So you made good contact, square on the barrel, perfectly on time. Really trying to segment of you do the good things. This is what that contact looks like, and you do all of the bad things. And this is, you get into your swords and your really kind of ugly swings and misses, and that comes out into a flawed swing. But really off the bat here, just kind of looking at this and thinking over conceptually what it looks like, did you think that this will be kind of more helpful for hitters or pitchers, or is it really just going to define, in classic the approach angle world, it depends, and it's more the hitter pitcher interaction?
Yeah, I think it measures different things. So you can kind of use it to be like how much, like we've talked about, oh, they fooled the batter. This could be like in some ways a proxy for like how correct are this hitter's guesses. And we'll get into kind of some of the high level analysis and like breaking down of like, okay, as they can remove variables to have to choose from, their accuracy gets smaller. And so like it is kind of like they're fooled less often. And some of that may be due to like a pitch repertoire, but it also may just be due to like that hitter's particular process. I think it is very I'm I'm probably about equally interested, but I like the idea of it from a pitcher standpoint of just figuring out, like I said, kind of sequencing. How do you like set up a hitter that this gives you another data point other than just the outcome of what the pitch was, like swinging strike, called strike, foul in play, that kind of thing. I like the idea of knowing, okay, not only did he miss, he missed by a lot. So like that means that you set him up to knock him down, kind of thing. Or you had him sitting here and you threw him this, like that was great pitch execution from like your sequencing standpoint. And some of that may be tied to with even like catcher evals of like using miss distance as a proxy for game calling, that like if the battery like understands, okay, he keeps flailing away at these sliders low and away, just keep feeding them to him. Or like understanding the nuances of like changing eye levels, going inside outside, changing velos, like the ability to like sequence those things well might get it to a point where you can also look at like, okay, Jacob Mizurowski has an insane miss distance because his stuff is just that nasty. But then you might get a guy like Seth Lugo who gets a decent, and I don't have those numbers in front of me, but as a representation of the idea of like a kitchen sink pitchability guy, like if Seth Lugo has a high miss distance, then like, oh, okay, it's because he has a bunch of tools to use and ways that he can use them. And so I think there are a bunch of different ways to get to it, that it might even be like a supplemental, like once you control for the stuff of a pitch, you can get into like, this is now the remainder of kind of what's happened is due to like the pitch variability, the mix, the pitchability, the guile of the pitcher, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that all makes a ton of sense. I'm excited to see what that looks like. But we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into what we know so far and kind of our early look at these stats, just the really, really first 3 days here. Okay, so we kind of ran down over what the stats look like, what we're looking at now, what is accessible. And I think the first thing that kind of came to mind from, watching a lot of baseball, playing a lot of baseball, is that a lot of this anecdotally makes sense. You see your guys with tons of swing and miss who miss the most. If you go to the bat tracking leaderboard and show the average miss distance, you'll see a Jake Berger, a Wilson Contreras, a Bryce Harper, Cam Smith is close here, where these guys are big swingers, and you see them swing and miss a ton, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. And on the pitching side, I know Mason Miller is the top of miss distance, and it's kind of similar to Jacob Mizrachi, where it's like, yeah, this stuff is that good, that doesn't surprise me. So, I'm gonna kind of tee up this question for you. Is it good to quantify something like this, where you're like, oh, this makes so much sense? Is it really worth getting into the numbers there?
Yeah, I've gotten this a lot. I got it when we got the very first wave of bat tracking data, and I was showing that, different locations in the zone means that a swing is kind of longer or shorter. Like down and away, swings were generally longer, up and in, swings were generally shorter. And I got some feedback that's like, yeah, this is obvious. Everybody already knew that. And like numbers and analytics don't have to like be revolutionary. I know there's this idea that's like they're trying to change the game, and it's like no. Sometimes it can just be like proving that like the general wisdom of the game has been correct, like validating kind of what you said, what we already knew, like what we've been watching. And I feel like at least at the high level I've been looking at this, that's held true. That okay, like a lot of this is pretty intuitive as far as okay, how to, count, and we'll get into that, and pitch types, like how do those affect miss distances, and even some of the guys that are good and bad at miss distance, both in terms of pitchers and hitters. Like these track, like if you asked me ahead of time, I probably could have given you a decently accurate leaderboard ranking of those. And so like I'm here for having a number to tell you that tells a story. And that's kind of what this does, of rather than being like, and it's also when you get reports about like, oh, a hitter said this, like I know um Alex Bregman, and Mike Petriello talked about this, but like Alex Bregman was saying that he was early on soft stuff, and now you can go and see like, oh, his off speed pitches, he's like at the top of the leaderboard in early rate for off speed pitches, and so it's like yes, like now we can like confirm what hitters say with number, like we have evidence to kind of back that up on the public end, or kind of just understanding like, oh, this guy's slumping. Like, why would he be slumping? Like trying to diagnose things. Like, oh, he's early. Like maybe he needs to sit back and see, or he's late, or he's under. Maybe he needs this approach change, or even just like quantifying. Like, yeah, we knew he had a hole at the top of the zone, and here, like now we know, like, oh, why? Like is it because he's missing by a lot there? So maybe he's guessing incorrectly, or is it that he just can't catch up. Like if he's late, he just can't catch up the fastballs there. Or but if he's, over and under, then it's like a bat accuracy thing. And that's a different question than like the swing timing question. And I think this gives us a lot more tools in our analysis tool belt that are also analytical in kind of the general verbiage.
And it also goes to the age old question of, not age old question, but you replace the term analytics with information. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of people would view it differently, right? There's knowing that a guy swings and misses too much and too far away on a breaking ball, but then actually understanding, is this a complete outlier, or is he able to make the profile work with other changes? And being able to understand what that looks like and have kind of numbers along with it, because we all know that a lot of former players and even guys who are maybe a little too cranky about analytics, know their stuff, obviously. And a lot of these concepts go hand in hand. There are, at the end of the day, only so many ways to build a successful major league player. And, these numbers just kind of increase the ways we can understand that on the public side. But it's one of those things where, just knowing and proving a lot of the things that we have known. And as you have more and more people get into baseball, and especially people who maybe don't have baseball experience, can understand concepts that wouldn't otherwise have, I think is really important. But looking at the kind of pitch type breakdown of miss distance. It was pretty straightforward, and again, anecdotally, kind of made sense with breaking pitches having the biggest miss distance on average, then off speed, and then fastballs. Um, did any of the kind of pitch type splits there change how you view any of these pitch types, or was it very, this all kind of makes sense? I know the forkball stood out among the breaking or the off-speed pitches, and I think was had a bigger miss distance than most of the breaking pitches. But I think that also could have been a sample size thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is sample size or classification thing of that, only so many guys have a pitch classified as a forkball, and baseball savant statcast team, they're always reclassifying things to be most accurate to what the pitcher says they throw. And I appreciate that, even if it does kind of make things tricky when you're trying to do by pitch type analysis. But that's also why I generally like bucketing these pitches together into like fastballs, breaking balls, off speed. Um, as far as the thing I liked about this is you like I tend to view a pitcher's repertoire as being anchored by the fastball. That's that's the thing you have to catch up to. That's the thing that you you have to react the fastest to, and so you have to be ready for that the most. Slower pitches, in theory, you have more time to kind of react to them. So it's like you need to be ready for the fastball, and then you can kind of adapt to the secondaries, to the off-speed stuff. And this tends to validate that guys are missing the least on fastballs. And even, you get some of these movements, like you get a fastballs with like 18 inches of ride or sinkers with 18 inches of run, and guys are pretty accurate with them. It's because like, yeah, they're hunting those. Like that's the thing that they're looking at. Part of that too is fastballs are generally a pitcher's most thrown pitch, so you expect the thing thrown the most. So it is a little bit kind of cyclical in that nature, like circular logic based. But I think it's cool that you get things like sweepers and sliders and curveballs all being in the same general span, even though they're vastly different in how they get there of, terms of shape, in terms of speed and all, and same thing with kind of the off-speed pitches, that those are also like, it's crazy that those are different. And, some of that also has to do with platoon splits, and that's something that I haven't, as of time of recording, haven't quite looked into it, but I'm sure there'll be some really fun like platoon splits based on these types. But yeah, I like the idea that this kind of validates that guys are sitting fastball because they're most accurate on their fastball swings, even against, modern fastballs that are above 95 and getting, crazy IVB, as we talked about last week. Especially even like compared to like what their slots are like.
Yeah, and I know, at least for me, kind of my early inclination in looking at these, one of the biggest things that I feel like I could pull immediate value out of here was fastball timing. For seeing kind of fringe hitters who have been struggling, can you catch up to the major league fastball? Because that is kind of the bare minimum to survive as a major league hitter. And I'm going to be classically biased here as a Cardinals fan, but I was looking into Victor Scott, who just got demoted to AAA by the Cardinals, and his swing timing was just really really late on major league fastballs, and he was just getting overwhelmed. And he wasn't, if you can't catch up to that and can't sit on it and do damage when you get your fastball, you know even if you're going to be primarily a breaking ball or off speed hitter, you still need to be able to show everyone that you can do damage when you get a fastball over the middle of the plate. And a guy like him was being a little later than expected in the kind of okay zone for contact, and I think that was really driving some of his struggles. Looking at, I know you put this visual out on social media kind of a couple days ago of looking at the average miss distance within the zone by pitch type, and again, it follows the breakdown of how we see miss distance generally. Of the slower stuff has the bigger miss distance, the fastball is lower, but this was actually flipped around where the off speed pitches had the bigger miss distances than the breaking balls in the zone. What did that tell you about how those pitch types work, in the zone in competitive locations rather than your big wipeout sweeper or slider out of the zone?
I think I think an interesting aspect has to do with It's the thing that changes the plane of break in a little bit, in a sense that, like, if you think fastballs are kind of rising and going arm side and breaking pitches are kind of dropping and going glove side, off speed, they add like a little bit more drop, but still arm side. And so they kind of can deviate off of that. Like, if you think of a line between like along the arm of where a pitcher releases a ball and how that ball break influences how that ball breaks. And so the more you kind of get away from that, and I think changeups, splitters, forkballs do a good job of kind of getting off of that arm line for movement. In addition to, they're at a velo band that is very different from the pitches that the hitters expect the most, the fastballs, even if they do, if even if they can tend to sometimes move in similar ways. So I think that's how you really kind of mess with guys' timing of this pitch. Looks like it's breaking in a similar direction, but the velo is just way different. And so it's that extra dimension of how does a hitter, how do you mess up their timing basically? And if you see, okay, this ball's breaking away, that means, okay, like that's going to be a slower pitch. I can, swing for like a certain time. Like if I see that slider, that's kind of a much different shape than a fastball, so I can tee up accordingly. But if you see that off speed, that's the same shape as the fastball, but now the velo is noticeably different, and that can like it's that's kind of my hypothesis for why that's bigger, is because there's more confusion in identifying that off speed pitch relative to a fastball than something like a breaking ball.
Yeah, and the breaking pitches have bigger movement profiles generally. So those are more likely to be things that are just naturally out of the zone, where something that is in the zone as a big curveball or a big sweeper is probably breaking in a way where you see it coming all the way, and either you're not missing it or it's something where it's a little bit different compared to, oh, you've been fooled and you're 15 miles an hour out ahead of yourself on a changeup that's at the knees in the zone. And this visual also enforced kind of the sinkers being the lowest average miss distance, and it really shows when it comes to contact suppression. And balls in play, that pitch is going to drive a lot of that. But going back to one of the stats we talked about kind of at the top that Baseball Savant kind of put out with all this data was perfect contact percent. So it was when you were making good contact on the barrel, you were on time. So all three things that you're ideally looking for with this. And that contact was not as strong of an output as I think I might have guessed. So it's just a 333 average, a 593 slugging, which is decent, and a 394 weighted on base average or WOBA. How surprised were you that the perfect contact was as poor as it is for compared to like a barrel rate or some other stats where like you do all the good things and something good happens?
I think this gets back into what we talked about at the start of defining where the contact is. Of perfect contact is going to be like across a pretty broad spectrum of what the bat, like where on the bat it is. And I think the the biggest distance, and actually if you think about it, so we didn't really talk about it before, but the three kind of dimensions that we're talking about are um inside and outside. So that's tied up. So basically, is the ball inside on the hands of the batter? Flail, is it outside and away from the batter? Or centered, which is kind of more like right in the heart of the the barrel. You have over, lined up, and under. So that's kind of straightforward. Over, the ball is passing beneath the bat as you swing. Set lined up, you hit the ball. Basically, that it is coming in at the same plane. And under, that your bat is going beneath the ball is kind of rising over. And then those two are measured in inches, or they're presented in inches. The interesting one, and the third one, is the timing, the actual like on time component of it. Is it late? Is it on time? Is it early? And something about a perfect contact is it requires the bat to be on time. And these are measured in fittingly time. It's in milliseconds. And that's basically to tell you, like, if you're early, you're going to kind of be out in front. If you're late, you're going to be behind. But kind of as we've talked about, those are ways to, like, if you're out in front, that's where pulled balls are too. So I'm curious, to dig into this of what is kind of the spray angle rate of what these look like. That if guys are early, often is that because they're mistiming it, or is it because they have a high pull rate? And so, as we've talked about, pulled, especially balls in the air, do a lot of damage. And so that's something where, like, by focusing on centered, like you've timed everything up right, that you might be leaving out some of, like, the best possible contact. And, like, it's understandable, not a lot of guys have the ability to really do a lot of damage to pulled balls consistently, but that's just something to kind of keep in context. And same thing of, like, a lot of these pitches are going to be kind of hit back up the middle if they're timed up properly and squared up. And so I don't think there's going to be there's a lot of variance in it, and I think it makes sense that this is just looking at all contact. It may be a bad exit velocity, even if the batter kind of slowed their swing down to make contact, like, that's still going to be like, oh, it was a perfect swing. Yeah, well, but if that perfect swing doesn't result in, basically, like, if you don't square the ball up, to talk about another, like, bat tracking stat that we've discussed in the past, if you're not converting your swing speed into exit velocity because it wasn't right in that sweet spot, if it's a little off the sweet spot, that's going to be less optimal contact. And so something like a barrel rate is so powerful because it's filtering out all of that less optimal contact, that it's looking at how hard, like, how often are you doing the most damage to the ball? And that's not necessarily the goal of what a perfect swing is doing. That this is measuring kind of more of how often are you making useful contact, and not how often are you doing damage to the ball. That those can be subtly different questions being answered.
Which also is kind of the complicated definition of what is perfect. Because if you're trying to hit line drives up the middle, more often than not, they will be caught on just kind of random batted ball luck of a line drive stayed up too high, or it was hit too low right at a middle infielder. And these things, just when you're not unlocking and it's not something that purely geared for power, as you said earlier, it's gonna miss the best possible outcomes, and where a lot of the stats that keep up a barrel rate so high, or just other optimal contact stats that are so beneficial, that this might miss. But the other interesting kind of aspect to miss distance itself was, you had also put out a visual about average miss distance for all swings by count. And the biggest misses come with no balls, so 0 counts, 0-1 counts, 0-2 counts, and then steadily decrease, with 1 ball, with 2 balls, with 3 balls. And I think the two biggest callouts for me were both in 3 ball counts, where in 3-0, hitters missed, significantly less than anywhere else. And I think that really shows how particular guys are when you get to 3 balls. They're looking for one thing and one thing only. And if you're swinging at 3-0, you best not be missing. And the data playing that out is really neat to see. But the other thing that kind of caught my eye was that 3-1 actually had a higher average miss distance than 3-2. And that it's one of those things where I think of sequencing, and that's where my mind goes, and kind of how you play into this in the counts, where, oh, a 3-1 pitch is, oh, it's such a hitter's count, he's gearing up for an A+ swing, max out the swing speed, send this ball 450 feet to your pull side, and the pitcher throws just a beautifully executed changeup, and you're swinging over it out of your shoes, looking stupid in a place where the hitter, in theory, has the advantage. So I'm really excited to see kind of what the count statistics and count leverage stuff look like, and I think kind of everything we've talked about here kind of leads into that. But we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to kind of take a step back and just, in these miss distance and swing bat tracking data, and get into how we evaluate a new stat as analysts and researchers. There hasn't really been enough time for us to build all of the research and really understand how all of this stuff works. It is the shiny new tool. It's been out for 3 days, and you have to sleep at some point. And take care of your life and do all of these things. You can't grind out until we have all the answers on all the new things. But generally speaking, kind of what's your framework to understanding something before there's real legitimate other research on it?
I like I think we talked before about how do we frame this in terms of how we understand and watch baseball. And so whenever I get a stat like this, I tend to think of it as like, okay, what questions does this answer? Like, or what is this trying to answer? Or even like, what could I answer with it? And so that's how I tend to start with pretty much every stat I'm looking at. Like, what basically can this do? And part of that is I joked about it in my striker article, the strike minus ideal contact rate. I refer to it as the Alexander Chase checklist. Friend of the pod, former guest on the show. Uh, that in discussing like how do we break down what a new stat looks like, or how do we implement it? His checklist was basically, what is it built to do? When can it be trusted? When does it break? And how should it not be used? And so the first point, what is it built to do? That is primarily in my mind. Is what is this stat built to show? And in miss distance, it is kind of what it says on the tin of it's telling you how much a pitch misses a bat by. And the swing timing is like, okay, what was their timing like in terms of where along their swing were they when the bat was closest to the ball? And those are pretty broad, which is great because there's a lot of wiggle room to kind of play with that and get into kind of stats that can be derived from it. Like, okay, how do we tease out this component of miss distance? And so that's what I'm excited about, like as far as like a theoretical high level perspective of it. Um, and then okay, we have an idea like definitionally of what is it trying to do? What does it want to do? Then it is looking at this is more of like now exploratory data analysis. How well does when you segment it out, and we talked about things like by pitch type and by count, and how well does that match up with our intuition or general baseball wisdom? And there's also, okay, how does it correlate to things that we already know about? So how well does a high miss distance correlate to something like whiffs, or how much does it correlate to something like a chase rate, like if on a off speed pitch that miss distance is probably going to be pretty high for pitches that have a high chase rate. And that makes sense because if you're swinging out of the zone, you likely don't, that's not likely where you wanted to be hitting a ball. So you kind of got fooled by it. So that's, you get into like, okay, how, how do we triangulate in the frame of like stats we already have and understand? How do we triangulate kind of like what this does? How does this fill that kind of space in our analytical understanding? Um, Another one is this a process or an outcome stat? Process ones are generally going to be very physics based in what the hitter and pitcher do. So for that, I mean something like velocity, movement, and release information for a pitcher. Like those are process. Those are basically the things that the pitcher directly controls. And, even location to some extent, even though it's a little bit noisier, that's still kind of like a process. And some pitchers are better at that than others. Swinging strike rate, on the other hand, would be something that is an outcome. It's going to be informed by those process, those inputs, but it's going to be based on a lot of other things. For someone like for the hitter side, it's much thornier because there's so much of hitters can change and adapt their inputs. So you think of something like, oh, well, his bat speed, how fast can he swing a bat? Well, they might be swinging at different, like we know hitters have told us, we've seen it in research that hitters can change their bat speed. And so that's something that is dependent on what they think the pitch is going to be. So in some ways kind of hitter processes are outcomes of what the pitcher does. So with that caveat, there are like things that the hitter generates that are maybe more of like what their process is. And that's things like swing speed, where they swing the bat along the path. And then the outcomes are thing, and the outcomes are like the result of what happens across all of those process or those input stats. And so by this framework, miss distance is an outcome that you're measuring what happened. It is not an input. There's not anything like implicit about miss distance. It requires like what the pitcher did, where they located it, what their decision making was, and this at this opposite end, what the hitter brought to the table. Like what was his swing? What how fast was it? What was the plane of it? Where did what was his timing on it? And then the output of those things is miss distance.
Yeah.
And when you think about that from a stat point of view, those kind of like more implicit stats stabilize much faster. So I know we talked about it with bat speed, that it's relevant like within one game. Same thing. A lot of the like physical characteristics of a pitch, velo, break, release, those are also extremely quick to be usable. Something that is an outcome based because it's reliant on other variables, other things to, before it gets measured, that it's going to be kind of a broader, wider distribution of how it's measured.
Yeah, I know on my end, obviously I can't say obviously, but I am not the research and fully analytical mind that you are and how you look at these stats and really the process of it. And I come from more the player analysis side of it. And when I get new stats, I think you've talked about a lot of things that I pay attention to, but for me, it's really is it a process or an outcome is the biggest thing, especially for a stat that is so in the weeds like this, where you're looking at backtracking and you're looking at, pitch shape and stuff. And more often than not, in recent, new stat releases, that has recently been more of a process stat, right? How hard is a guy swinging a bat? How hard is, how is a pitch moving and stuff like that? And this is kind of a weird complexion of all of that, where it all comes together, and it is, maybe it's not as meaningful as you'd think, in the moment for the how much is built up to have this release. But really, in any of these stats, especially because so much of the surface level stuff has already been scratched and researched so well, is that you have to treat anything like this, it's creating more questions. It's not like, oh, we have answers to everything. And I think that's where a lot of resentment of, oh, why do we need to quantify this? We already know it comes into play. This isn't meant to be, oh, well, now we know how this is going to be, and that's that. This is opening up more questions, more ways that we can look at, players, pitches, at bats, how they interact with one another. And even at the end of the day, if you're listening to this, you're really interested in the fantasy output of a stat like this, that is going to be likely very minimal, right? Because if you take all of the components that lead to hitting for average or hitting for power, they get covered in a lot of different ways. But this is more for understanding what, how does baseball operate? What are those relationships look like in a pitch, sequence? As Kyle was kind of talking about at the end there, a hitter can only do with what a pitcher gives him, right? If he's going to get 4 breaking balls away in the dirt, he can walk to first base if he wants, or he can swing and miss it up. It's not like he can, lift that up and hit it as hard as he wants, right where he wants to. And there's only so much you can do there. So really kind of understanding what all of it means and what the context is. We talk a lot about context, and the it depends of it all is really important to understand with anything new and anything as fresh and shiny as this. And for me, as like you start to understand this, I'm sure Kyle will put out some great research. I know Fangraphs, the Athletic, and all these other great sites will put out great public research on this new stuff. And on my end, I think the biggest thing for me is to start with a single player, understand how all of the stats work for that player. How can you use other stats to conceptually understand how they work? How does this make sense? How does this make sense? How does it play into their decision making? Who is it? Can I understand this for one player? And then when I'm interested in someone else, what does that look like? But kind of moving on here you understand the stats, and over the coming weeks and months, as you really learn what this means, how willing are you to work this into the research process? Is it a pretty immediate thing of, oh, we have to tackle it and implement it, or is it more kind of cautious on the, oh well, let's see how important it is before we jump to any sweeping conclusions?
I mean, I love it. I'm jumping in kind of full force. I think something that's really great with it is that we have a broad base of data to draw from because we have it from the second half of 2023 up to current. And so we've got two full seasons and then two partial seasons. So that's, you know, m- over 1 million pitches. Not all of them are swings, but that's a huge base to draw from. And so we can get a lot of really interesting information from it. We can even see some like seasonal differences. How does this change? How sticky is this year to year? So that helps us pull it more into like how much should we believe it? How useful, how impactful is it going from year to year? And so that's always something that's kind of in the back of my head, and that's part of that checklist I talked about of like when can we trust it. So that's kind of a two-pronged question of when can we trust it across seasons, so how predictive is it of next year, and then kind of how stable is it within a season, how quick can we be to believe something like a missed distance, how well does missed distance early relate to missed distance later in the season. And so those are both questions that inform kind of what we can use it for and inform things of like, okay, if we wanted to use this to model something like sequencing or even like an expected strikeout rate, if we want to use this as a component of it, you can get an idea of will this actually be useful based on how stable and predictive the stat is of itself. And then you can also relate it to, okay, well, does it relate to strikeouts or is it more of kind of like a novelty? Like, is this like cool to know and like validates what my eyes see? But as far as like statistical impact, maybe it's not as useful. I think I think this is going to have there are a lot of venues for this to be useful. I think I think there will be some use in predicting strikeout rates. If you get guys who have higher than average miss distances, I think that's going to be helpful because missing bats is the biggest driver of strikeouts, and strikeouts are one of the best things a pitcher can do. I think it's going to, and then that can inform kind of what your ERA is. So I think, and then sorry, in the context of like modeling, like pitch level, like what we do with PLV, but even just in terms of sequencing, of understanding like, hey, this guy sequences his pitches really well. So that can help better explain maybe a difference between what his ERA is and what his XFIP or his xERA or his FIP is. That maybe because this guy sequences well, we actually think he's better off than like he will over predict what these ERA estimators say. Like this is a a point that we can help to like shape. Yeah, he's good at things that these models don't explicitly capture. And I think there's usage there too for giving context to other stats. And I think that there's a component of this that can be useful for that.
Yeah, I definitely know that this will hopefully kind of be plugging gaps and things, right? Of swing decision and your decision value in the PLV model is really, really strong already. But if you can incorporate, when is a guy having these big misses? Is he having big misses in consequential situations where, is he getting a big breaking ball in the middle of the plate and he's missing a ton? Like, is there something wrong there? And I wonder a lot. I know you've already alluded to it on the tunneling and sequencing of, what are hitters getting geared up to do? What are pitchers setting them up for and putting them into, certain situations? And then kind of at the pitch type level of are certain shapes working in the ways that, you would expect. We've had so much research, we'll get to probably next week at this point an episode on stuff models and breakouts, into what stuff and pitch movement really looks like across the board. But are sweepers doing a lot better? Are they getting kind of bigger misses, worse contact? And then kind of, the other thing that I've been really interested in is, again, on the decision value side, will this be easier to detect swing or decision value changes? Like, is some guy, choosing to be to miss less, or he's making the swing decisions in order to miss less, or he's getting under the ball more, and he's been hitting too many ground balls, where you can see that, oh, he's starting to figure it out, and this is a relationship change where it will work out in the end. And even if the underlying stuff might take even more time to settle, you can see at the pitch level of, oh, the missed distances are less, the contact looks a little bit better, and maybe everything else in the profile still needed to come together. What can happen? And we rely so much on whiffs on the pitching side. As you said, and as we all know, it's the best thing that a pitcher can do, right? Like, nothing good can come from a whiff. So understanding why that can happen on both ends, I think, will drive just so much, as we really understand this, kind of plug the gaps from the traditional knowledge we know of what is driving strikeout rates. And I know you've already talked about, missed distance over expected, or expected strikeout rates, and stuff like that. I think that's going to be just a really fun frontier of what we can get into when we plug this into, a lot of the components we already have. But that's really going to do it for this episode. We're going to be on it. I know Kyle will be continuing to put out phenomenal stuff with this in the coming weeks. But Kyle, anything else you're working on, and where listeners can find you?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm digging into this hard to try and get a ton of fun new information. Give it to, anyone who follows me on socials. I'm at Analytics everywhere. I'm posting out these charts and doing a lot of kind of back and forths with a lot of people from other sites, like Nate mentioned, The Athletic, Fangraphs, Baseball Prospectus. There are, a lot of Substacks, a lot of blog posters that people have great ideas. Get online, follow them. That's how we learn more as a community, as a collective. That's how we get kind of more answers from these data points that get released to us. So yeah, working on that. We recently just put out for our Pitcher List subscribers, our PO Pro subscribers, a current talent estimate for our process stats. So that takes into account every pitch they've seen across our, since 2020, and gives context for, like, if a guy's on a hot streak or a cold streak, how relevant is that? How much is that is signal, how much of that is noise? So it gives you a good idea of how good is this guy at this metric right now, and how can I use that going forward, rather than just like, oh, he's been good this year. Like, well, does that move the needle on who he is? Is that just noise and we shouldn't trust it? Or is that really impactful and that means a lot and we should buy even more than just what a high number for a season means? So that's been a lot of fun to put together. I'm really excited to kind of get into more, digging into more of that. I think that's a very fantasy relevant metric too. In addition to some of the other work we're doing on hitter pitcher interactions and kind of simming through how well do we think a certain pitcher's pitches will perform against a certain lineup, to get an idea of, where should you pitch and when to whom. Maybe some of this swing timing and miss distance data goes into that of, well, if a guy misses huge here in this count versus this pitch type, so let's, maybe you should use that more. But we'll see. That remains to be seen. And in addition to, maybe Statcast, maybe the Savant team just drop more data. Maybe in a month we're talking about some new stat they just dropped, and I'll be happy to dig into that one too.
As if we didn't already have enough to do. But you can find all of Kyle's phenomenal work on the Pitcher List site, in the Pitcher List Discord, and at Blandalytics everywhere. And you can find me at _Nate Schwartz on socials. And you can find me writing and doing the Reddit AMAs with Scott Chu every Friday. But that'll do it for this episode of The Approach Angle, and we will see you on the next one.